free. She might be his child. She was almost certainly his child. Hetheridge closed his eyes, willing himself calm. Like any other man, he had tried to imagine what a son or daughter would be like, and the visions were pleasant and flattering. Never once had he envisioned a sullen, directionless young woman with a nightmare boyfriend and a drug habit or two. Something came back to him then. It was his father in their family home, ensconced in a leather wing-back chair, double old-fashioned in hand. It was the calm, measuring look and the almost off-handed statement. "When I look at you, boy, I wonder how something like you ever came from me. Good God, what fools are men to pin their hopes on sons." Hetheridge felt himself go cold. He was under control, and the wiser half of his mind, the half he could depend on, told him exactly how to proceed. Reopening his phone, he rang Kate's mobile. She picked up on the first ring. "Chief?" "Forgive the interruption. About Bert Rowland. Based on your interview, should he be placed under arrest?" "No, I think he's clean. Clean of Ginny Rowland's death, at least." "Fair enough. Caution him to remain in the city and release him. Make sure the scene is processed properly, then go home. We'll meet at 9 o'clock tomorrow instead of 7. That should give you time to rest a bit before we compare notes. As you suggested, I'll send you out to interview Ivy Helgen. Now, if D.S. Barr is with you, put him on the line." "I'm here, Chief," Barr said after a moment. "Cool. I need you at the yard as soon as possible. Madge and Jules Comfrey need to be re-interviewed, and I'd like you to handle it. I'm sure Kate told you why." "I'll be right there." If Barr was surprised, he gave no sign. "One more thing. I believe both Madge and Jules are under the influence. I'm going to ask them to submit to drug tests right away. More than likely both will refuse and demand their solicitor, and will be forced to compel them, but I'll make the attempt. See you when you arrive." Madge and Jules were waiting inside New Scotland Yard's lobby alongside 2 uniformed constables. The room, cavernous and minimally lit, rang with a faint echo each time Madge took a step in her black patent heels. Noticing them for the first time, Hetheridge realized Madge had stormed a crime scene in those heels. Jules at least wore trainers and jeans. It was a generational difference, he supposed. Madge belonged to an era that still believed in dressing up to break the law. Jules' agitation had not decreased. She was texting into her mobile while simultaneously pacing. Madge, if anything, looked asleep on her feet. Her pupils were tiny, and her arms were crossed over her chest. "Escort Miss Comfrey to an interview room. Mrs. Comfrey and I will talk in my office," Hetheridge told the constables. "No way, you can't split us up," Jules cried. Attention wrested from her phone at last. "Where Mum goes, I go." Ignoring her, Hetheridge took Madge's arm and steered her toward the lifts. "Tell her to obey. I don't want this to turn into an arrest and an overnight stay," he said quietly. "I'll be fine," Madge called to Jules in a weak voice. "Go with them, sweetheart. We're just here to talk. Don't be afraid." Once the lift doors closed them in, Madge turned to Hetheridge. "You wouldn't actually arrest her, would you? She's not Kevin. She couldn't endure it." "I'm within my rights to arrest her," Hetheridge said, noncommittal. "Why didn't you stop her from going to the Rowlands?" Madge looked embarrassed. "I tried, but when one of Ginny's neighbours told us something was happening, and we called Bert's phone and couldn't get an answer, Jules went wild. She always loved Ginny and Bert, and she was afraid for them, that's all. When she wouldn't listen to me and I couldn't convince her not to go, all I knew was to come along. I knew it was ridiculous, but I had no idea it was against so many laws." The lift doors opened. Hetheridge led Madge to his office, unlocked the door and switched on the lights. Then, without inviting her to sit or make herself comfortable, he said, "Tell me now, is Jules my daughter?" Madge's fuchsia-painted mouth worked. She made no sound, but her heavily lined eyes slid away from him, looking on something a few meters away. "I don't feel well. I need to sit down. Would you mind?" He closed one hand over her right forearm, then another hand over her left, staring into her eyes. "Is Jules my daughter?" Madge blinked at him. "Yes." "What sort of drugs is she on?" "Nothing," Madge cried. She struggled against his grip. Let me go now, or I'll scream. You can't abuse me this way." Hetheridge released her in one motion. She staggered back, entirely from her own fear and lack of balance, yet staring at him in horror, as if he'd struck her. "Tell me what drugs she's on." "Nothing!" Madge cried. "Nothing. She's a good girl, and she's nothing to do with you. You're just the sperm donor. It's none of your business what she does or doesn't do." "I want you both to submit to urinalysis right now," Hetheridge said. "No!" Madge drew herself up. "Absolutely not. I demand my solicitor, and I demand you withdraw yourself from this case, Tony, immediately." Before he knew what he would do, Hetheridge snatched away Madge's bag and dumped its contents on the dense green carpet. Keys, a credit card case, a pair of reading glasses, a silver tube of lipstick, a prescription bottle. With a strangled cry, Madge dropped to her knees, reaching for the prescription bottle. Hetheridge, far more limber despite the arthritis in his knee, was there first. Rising, with the bottle in hand, he removed its cap and spilled the contents into his palm as Madge, still on her knees, stared up at him in outrage. The bottle's label indicated 30 tablets of Valium for Madge Comfrey, and the Valium was there, small white round pills. But mixed in with them were larger yellow tablets, each stamped O.C. "Mixing OxyContin with your Valium these days?" "Give me that!" Madge snapped, struggling to her feet. "You have no right. This is an illegal search. Wait till I tell my solicitor." "Who gets these for you? Kevin?" Hetheridge asked. "Is that why you don't mind Jules seeing him? Because he has his uses for you too?" "Escort me downstairs now," Madge said, her voice like a glacier. "And pray to God, if you have a God other than yourself, that you still have a career once I'm done with you." Chapter 23. When Kate arrived at New Scotland Yard the next morning, she was in a mood that veered from cautiously optimistic to downright happy. The case was beginning to generate answers as well as questions, and she had a feeling, unsupported by logic but strong nevertheless, that Malcolm Comfrey's administrative assistant/mistress, Ivy Helgin, would hold the key to solving both murders. Was that why Kate felt an odd flutter in her stomach? The realization that her next interview might lead to an arrest and then a conviction? Or was it the prospect of seeing Hetheridge again? Striding toward the bank of lifts, Kate caught a glance, an outright smirk, from a pinched-faced D.C. Was that meant for her? Even if she had only 2 friends at the Yard, it was 2 more than she'd ever had before, and a measure of respect had accompanied the newfound companionship. The D.C.'s smirk suggested Kate had devolved back into a pariah overnight. Punching the lifts button, Kate glanced surreptitiously from left to right. Another glance, this time from D.I. Letty Markham, a tall, broad-shouldered woman with a face as wide and flat as a shovel. The look from D.I. Markham's deep-set eyes was aimed square at Kate, its message clear. "You poor sod." "Geez," Kate thought, ashamed of how her heart sped up. "You think someone died." "Oi, Wakefield, have a nice lie-in, did you?" came a jovial, overloud male voice behind her. Kate turned to see Superintendent Jackson leering at her. He looked in a fine mood. A few other officers paused in their progress to observe the exchange. The lift dinged behind her. Relieved, Kate spun toward it. "Sorry, gotta go." "Leave it," Jackson said, his voice lifting high, as it did when he was angry or triumphant. "I've been waiting for you." Kate felt a surge of suspicious dread. Jackson looked far too pleased. "Why?" "You're mine, love. Hetheridge's taken a powder, so you and Mahatma Ganges are back under my wing. We're going to solve the Comfrey and Rowland cases in record time and prove what a dream team we can be." "What do you mean, Hetheridge's taken a powder?" Kate asked. Now her stomach wasn't fluttering, it was doing flips. "Hetheridge is accused of brutalising a witness and trying to force a confession. In fact, the witness, Mrs. Comfrey, is in the process of obtaining a restraining order against him. Commander Deaver tossed him off the case and called upon yours truly to pick up the pieces. Not surprising." Jackson grinned, "since the old man's arrest-conviction ratio is barely 2/3 of mine, and he's never been quick to rap a major case." "That's because he only arrests people who are actually guilty," Kate tried to say. But at that moment her stomach heaved. Lava shot up her throat, and before Superintendent Jackson could jump aside, Kate vomited instant coffee and blue raspberry Pop-Tarts all over his shoes. Bar was waiting for Kate when she emerged from the ladies' lavatory more than a quarter-hour later. She knew she still looked pale and shell-shocked, but a dab of lipstick and blush had somewhat reanimated her. This pregnancy-style vomiting reminded her of the time she'd eaten a bad bit of lobster, choking, heaving, and spluttering long after every trace of sustenance was gone. Whenever she thought of Hetheridge's career in jeopardy and Superintendent Jackson taking his place, the purging started again. Finally, she forced herself to think of nothing but her desire to successfully interview Ivy Helgen. By keeping her mind focused on that goal, Kate calmed herself, washed her face, and exited the lavatory with a semblance of dignity. "You look like rubbish," Bar said.
"And you look manic, like you chewed coffee beans all night and washed them down with Red Bull."
"I'm planning on murdering Jackson," Bar said conversationally. "Every detective has his own murder plan. Mine is flawless. No DNA or dental evidence left behind. Just you wait. You'll know I did it, but you'll never work out how."
"What happened to the chief last night?"
Kate's left side still ached. She pressed her hand against it, ignoring the curious glances from those passing through the corridor. "I don't know," Bar admitted. "Supposedly he took Madge Comfrey up to his office, slapped her around, searched her person, and tried to coerce a confession. Madge and her daughter were baying at the moon when I got here, playing it up for their solicitor and threatening to bring down the Met. I did the only thing I could think of." Kate waited. "I arrested them. Because the crime is murder. We have 36 hours to hold them before we have to officially charge them with anything." Kate let out her breath all at once. Bold move. They bloody well deserved it. Bar was unrepentant. "Think there's any chance Hetheridge brutalized Madge?"
"None."
"Right. So a night in lockup was just what those lying harpies deserved. They refused all questions on advice of their solicitor, by the way. So I stayed up all night and still have sod all new information. Well, except for their drug tests, which were positive. Mum does downers and painkillers, little miss does coke. But because of who they are, Jackson isn't about to prosecute them for what amounts to minor indiscretions. And to be honest, I doubt Hetheridge would have bothered with vice charges either. God, I'm tired." Pressing his palms to his eyes, Bar yawned mightily, then looked Kate over with something more akin to his usual good-natured expression. "So, what gives with you? I know Jackson revolts you even more than he revolts me, but puking all over his Oxfam shoes seems over the top. You're not in the club, are you?" Kate sighed. Bar's eyes went wide. "You're kidding. You are?" He stared at her for several seconds, then leaned close and whispered, "Is it the chief's?" Groaning, Kate pushed him back.
"Of course not. Do the maths. And never mind that now. Can I assume the super's waiting for us?"
"He is. Let us go and hearken to the world's greatest detective." When they entered Superintendent Jackson's office, the gang was assembled. 2 junior DCs, 2 detective sergeants, and 3 DIs who fluctuated between one super's team and another, depending on need. Clearly, Commander Deaver had grown weary of the Comfrey Rowland case and was willing to provide the manpower to resolve it as soon as possible. Superintendent Jackson, who fancied himself both an overpowering authority figure and a regular bloke, sat man-of-the-people style in the centre of the room. The remains of a jam doughnut was in his right hand. The empty box, stained with red goo, lay open on the desk beside him. "No, listen to this one," he cried over a shout of laughter. "What about an all-girl threesome? What'd you call that?"
"Ménage à trois,"
Kate said. She'd heard it around the yard at least half a dozen times. Jackson pressed the doughnut into his mouth and chewed, studying her as the room went silent. "Watch out, boys," he said at last, around a mouthful of cake and jam. "The headmistress will castrate you if you step out of line." Kate put on a game smile and shrugged. She had chosen her place in what was still a man's world. There was a time to assert her equality and a time to let deliberate provocation slide. "Done sicking up?" Jackson continued. "Better watch it, Wakefield. Folks will say you're in the club."
"No way,"
Kate lied, keeping that "I know how to take my lumps" expression on her face.
A shock to hear Hetheridge was out, and I've been reassigned again, that's all. But now I'm here, I promise to do my best, sir."
"As do I," Barr muttered, somewhat less convincingly. "Well," Jackson folded his arms across his chest. "While we were waiting on you and the boy Wonder to turn up, we were discussing errors in the Comfrey Rowland investigation." "Really?" Barr asked in a cold voice, before Kate could intervene with another simpering reply. "Enlighten us." "First, the obvious, breaking the law. Coercing a confession is a shocking lapse," Jackson clucked to his audience. "Second, dismissing material evidence. The balcony window was open, was it not? The inside garage door had been forced. Two clear signs that the killer broke into the house, as I believe the crime scene photos also indicate. Third," Jackson said, rising and staring not at Kate but at Barr, "allowing a pair of, shall we say, inexperienced detectives to flit from theory to theory, antagonizing witnesses in the process. A successful investigation begins with a vision and follows that vision right down to arrest, trial, and conviction." "You've read the reports," Barr said before Kate could stop him. "Tell us who you've decided is guilty and we'll manufacture the evidence to prove it, sir." Jackson's face split in a triumphant grin. "No, you're used to having your head, Barr. You tell me what your next move would be." Anything but the truth, Kate thought, but, as she feared, Barr's desire to be proven right outweighed his wisdom in dealing with Jackson. "I think it's time we discovered exactly how much Madge and Jules Comfrey stood to inherit on Malcolm Comfrey's death," Barr said. "I'd also like to discover if their drug abuse is new or part of a long-standing pattern." "Wrong," Jackson said. "Faulty programming. Don't let it get you down, mate. Your correct answer would be research previous break-ins around the Comfreys' neighbourhood in the last 18 months. That's the route which will lead to resolution." "Research?" "Research," Jackson declared, unable to hide his pleasure at Barr's indignation. "Research and report on my desk by 5 this evening, or the Commander and I will have a discussion about your ability to play well with others." He turned to Kate. "What about you? What should your next assignment be?"
"I'm a little uncertain," she lied. "Last night I found out Malcolm Comfrey had a mistress named Ivy Helgin. She was also his administrative assistant, and you know what they say about no stone unturned, so I thought interviewing Miss Helgin might be a good idea. As Comfrey's assistant, she would know if he'd received death threats at the office, or if he feared some enemy from his business dealings might seek him out at home." That last bit struck a chord with Jackson's predetermined scenario. He gave Kate a benevolent smile. "Good, good." He glanced around the silent faces to emphasize his approval. "Never let it be said I won't admit it when one of you hits the right scent. Find and interview this Ivy Helgin, Kate. Pay special attention to any worries or concerns Comfrey expressed during his last days. Who knows? Perhaps you'll unearth something that pertains to the murder." Kate, not daring to meet Barr's incredulous stare, forced a self-effacing smile. "Thank you, sir. I'll get right on it." Outside of New Scotland Yard, stomach still twisting ominously, Kate made several phone calls. The first to Ivy Helgin's directory number was successful. Miss Helgin answered, expressed a desire to cooperate with the investigation, and agreed to meet Kate for lunch in Piccadilly Circus at 1 o'clock. Her second call to Hetheridge's mobile was met only by rings and an invitation to leave a message. On the third attempt she did, saying only, "Tony, Paul and I are thinking of you. We'll ring again later." Her third call was more problematic. The number was ex-directory, so Kate was forced to use the Met's resources to gain the information. Then she had to convince a Jamaican-born housekeeper her need to speak with the mistress was legitimate. By the time the person in question came on the line, Kate had spent 20 minutes trying to reach her. "Lady Margaret," she said, "it's DS Kate Wakefield. I'm sorry to disturb you, but I need your help." Chapter 24. Ivy Helgin pushed bits of her duck confit, a dish the Criterion Grill was known for doing well, around her plate. She looked as if her appetite had fled.
Kate, who found the expensive mess's aroma nauseating, avoided looking at the other woman's plate. She herself had ordered mineral water and a bowl of thin soup, but managed to swallow only a few mouthfuls of either. "I haven't enjoyed much since Mal died." Sighing, Ivy put an elbow on the table and plopped her chin on her palm like a bored child. "I've never grieved before, never lost anyone before Mal." That came as little surprise to Kate. It wasn't just Ivy's youth, she was 24, that made a history of serial mourning unlikely. It was her wide green eyes, her infectious smile, the lack of lines on her forehead, and even the way her strawberry blonde hair rippled to her shoulders in flawless, symmetric waves. Ivy Helgin seemed to be one of life's chosen few. A good soul reared by good souls, properly nourished and educated, treated kindly at every turn, and beaming that same kindness back into the world, with the innocence of a creature who knows nothing else. After 20 minutes with Ivy, who carried herself like a duchess and addressed doormen, waiters, and a detective sergeant from New Scotland Yard like a long-lost friend, Kate had to struggle to keep her jealousy in check. "How long were you with him?" Kate asked. 2 years, Ivy said. "My first real job. I came on as the junior assistant to Miss Gregor, who'd been with Mal since he founded the company. 6 months in, she retired and I began working with him more closely. I wasn't the best assistant," Ivy admitted, with a charming, self-deprecating laugh. "I muddled lots of things, especially maths. Sometimes Mal had to tutor me, but it was wonderful spending so much time in his company. Those first few weeks after Miss Gregor left, I began to know the real Mal, and it was wonderful." She smiled at Kate, her eyes bright with memory. "Didn't bother you that he was married?" Kate didn't succeed in sounding neutral. Some shriveled part of her wanted to shame Ivy, to wipe that smile off the younger woman's face. "Oh, it bothered me a great deal," Ivy said, still pushing duck comfy here and there. "And I didn't dare discuss it with my parents, or Father Vernon. It's not that I worried about their disapproval. I just didn't want to put them through the pain of feeling disappointed in me. And to be fair, Mal's situation wasn't the typical one of a straying husband out for what he could get. I couldn't subject his conduct to the judgment of those who wouldn't understand." Kate forced herself to take another sip of water. Her left side still ached, and she suspected dehydration was as much the culprit as that morning's violent retching. "So in what way was Malcolm Comfrey's marital situation atypical?" "Well, his wife had drawn a line in the sand. She wanted to remain married only for the sake of their daughter and their social standing. Mal agreed because he was a gentleman who believed in the sanctity of marriage. But he was only human," Ivy said. "He hadn't been allowed to experience love or passion in years. He was starving for affection, and I—" Breaking off, Ivy shook her head, pausing to master herself. "I believe we were fated to meet. I believe when two people share such a deep love, there can be no sin. It's meant to be. It's destiny." "I don't know if Mrs. Comfrey would agree with the in-name-only characterization of her marriage to Mr. Comfrey," Kate said, striving to keep the cynicism from her voice. No sense alienating a witness so unguarded. "Did you observe some interaction between them that convinced you Mrs. Comfrey agreed to her husband arranging an alternate relationship? How did she get on with you, for example?" Putting down her fork at last, Ivy covered her plate with her linen napkin. "Mrs. Comfrey treated me with a sort of cool courtesy, nothing more, nothing less. And I didn't push. I thought it might be somewhat hard for her to see her husband, even though she had rejected him, with a much younger woman. So I tried to be discreet and professional in her presence, as if Mal and I were nothing but business associates." Recalling Ginny Rowland's belief that Ivy was too attractive, sharp, and upwardly mobile to accept a man like Comfrey unless marriage were on the table, Kate asked, "Didn't it bother you that Mr. Comfrey couldn't offer you marriage?" "Oh, you have it wrong. For the last few months we were engaged," Ivy said, surprised. "Want to see the ring?" The waiter, a rotund man with a natural tonsure, chose that moment to appear. Before Kate could retrieve her jaw from the floor, he scooped up Ivy's rejected plate and Kate's nearly untouched soup. "Can I offer you anything more?" "I'd like to be bad," Ivy confided to the waiter, then shot a glance at Kate. "What do you think? Want to be bad this once?" Kate shrugged. Ivy turned back to the waiter. She gave him that smile again, a smile which expected all the world to return her goodwill, since it had never failed her yet. And to Kate's amazement, the working stiff visibly thawed.
"What do you have?" Ivy asked. "That's really, really bad?"
"We have creme brulee," the waiter said. "But the molten volcano cake is much worse. A small chocolate gund filled with brandy-laced fudge, set afire. To die for," he concluded, enjoying the excitement in Ivy's eyes.
"We'll take 2, Ivy squealed. "I can't have anything brandy-laced," Kate said. "Pregnant." "Creme brulee for you, then," Ivy said.
Nodding, the waiter hurried off to place the order. Kate, motivated by frugality rather than actual need, muttered,
"I didn't get a look at the prices." "Oh, don't worry, Detective, this is on me," Ivy said, her kindness too unforced to be anything but genuine. "My little sideline business has succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. I've had to hire an accountant and a personal assistant just to keep up. So treating you is my pleasure. But I mentioned the ring." She dug into her bag, producing a burgundy velvet box. Opening it, she removed a ring and placed it on the 3rd finger of her right hand. "Beautiful, isn't it?"
She extended her hand to Kate. Kate stared at the ring. A bright centre diamond of at least 2 carats was set in platinum or white gold. Clustered around that centre stone, smaller canary diamonds were arranged alongside bright red rubies. On Ivy's hand, the ring blazed, impossible to ignore, the cold purity of a diamond encircled by both light and heat.
"Good grief!" Kate breathed, forgetting her manners. "What's it worth?" "Oh, sorry," she amended, mortified. "That slipped out. It's gorgeous."
Ivy nodded. As she stared at the ring, her eyes began to shine. After a moment, she wiped at them, twisted the ring off her finger, and replaced it in the box, closing the burgundy-furred lid with a snap.
"I'd prefer to wear it always,"
she told Kate, tucking the ring box back in her bag.
"But not until this investigation into Mal's death ends. I wouldn't want to risk Mrs. Comfrey seeing it and understanding it came from her husband. I have it. I know what it meant. I don't have to flaunt it to the whole world."
Kate digested this information while Ivy sniffed, wiped her eyes, and used the silence to compose herself. Before their conversation resumed, the waiter reappeared, this time with a lump of dark chocolate debauchery for Ivy and a virginal white ramekin for Kate. Accepting a small torch from an assistant, the waiter passed the flame over Ivy's cake, which erupted into blue flame. Ivy squealed, clapping. Patrons at nearby tables seconded her delight with laughter and an additional spatter of applause. When the fire disappeared, the waiter turned to Kate's ramekin. Passing the blue flame over the top of the dessert, he moved it from side to side until the top was caramelized. Kate found the sugary odor disgusting, and no one applauded the result. Switching off the torch, the waiter turned back to Ivy, offered his sincere wish that she would enjoy the dessert, and bustled away.
"You mentioned your little side business."
Kate ignored her creme brulee as Ivy tucked into her molten volcano cake.
"I thought you were Malcolm Comfrey's administrative assistant. You have another business too?"
Ivy savoured a mouthful of chocolate, moaned in delight, then managed to answer.
"Oh, yes, I was still Mal's assistant, even after we became engaged. But not as much hands-on, you see. I actually had a junior assistant, Harriet, and she was absolutely brill. In the end, she took on most of Mal's heavy lifting. She'd had special courses to prepare herself for that sort of work, you see, while I kept Mal happy and brainstormed new ideas for my business. Dinovits." "Dinovits?"
Kate repeated. To be polite, she broke into the creme brulee with her dessert fork's delicate tines, but did not attempt to swallow a piece.
"Yes, the idea came to me one night while in bed. With Mal,"
Ivy whispered, a pretty blush appearing on both cheeks.
"We were talking about what the world needs most. Of course, I said the world's most important resource is children because children are the future, and it's a tragedy that so many of them live in poverty. And Malcolm said, when you're in poverty, you have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And I said, no, too many children don't have boots and they don't have strength. They don't have the good nutrition, for one thing, to become strong. They don't have the vitamins and minerals we take for granted. So suddenly I had this idea of giving every child in the world a free supply of vitamins, so they can grow up strong and pull themselves out of poverty."
Kate tossed her linen napkin atop the creme brulee.
"Sorry, sudden nausea, pay no attention to me. Pregnancy does funny things to your body. So what did Mr. Comfrey think of your idea to distribute free vitamins to the world's poor?
Well, at first he laughed at me and was rude, Ivy admitted, pausing between phrases to enjoy her molten cake. Then he had a change of heart and said he would give me a stake to start the business. I couldn't give away the vitamins for free, but I could offer them at the most competitive rates in the entire world. Ivy grinned at Kate. Of course, I was over the moon. I decided to call the product Dinovits, because all children everywhere adore dinosaurs. And we manufactured the vitamin pills to be chewable and even shaped like the 3 best dinosaurs, T-Rex, Velociraptor, and Apatosaurus.
And this business is a success?
An unprecedented success, Ivy said. It's like the moment I put the idea out to the universe responded with money. Dinovits got investors right away. I think Mal must have done a lot of lobbying for me behind closed doors. But the outpouring of response was amazing. And believe it or not, it's made me rich, she said, dropping back into a whisper. I bought my parents a new home, paid off my sister's debts. I could retire right now and never work again in my life. All from the first 6 months of the business. I reckon being a good person really does pay in the end. Kate studied Ivy for a long moment. Something Bert Rowland said occurred to her as she watched the younger woman finish her cake. When the dessert was nothing but a brown smear across the gold-edged plate, Kate asked,
How's the Dinovits business done since Malcolm Comfrey died?
Ivy blinked. Actually, it's lost money for the first time ever. I'm supposed to meet with my accountant next week. That's why I think Mal must have been helping me somehow, behind the scenes. All the contracts and orders are still in place, but the remittances have slowed to almost nothing. Kate nodded.
Back to your engagement. Did you and Mr. Comfrey actually set a date?
No. Ivy shook her head. He said first he had to tell his wife their life together was over. Back in her car, Kate checked her smartphone for messages. Nothing from Hetheridge or Barr, but Lady Margaret had called, and Kate wasted no time ringing her back. When Lady Margaret came on the line, her information was everything an investigator could hope for. First-hand, succinct, and germane. As Lady Margaret spoke in her crisp, no-nonsense tone, Kate sat behind the wheel and nodded, smiling idiotically as foot traffic passed her vehicle on both sides. Inside her head, the pieces were locking into place, one after another.
"Thank you, Lady Margaret,"
she breathed before disconnecting. She sat for another moment, still aware of her dodgy stomach and aching side, but no longer concerned with them. She knew. She was sure she knew. Now to call Hetheridge. Her phone trilled. Startled, Kate glanced at it, expecting to see Hetheridge's name on the screen. Instead, she saw one of the Yard's endless permutations of internal lines. That meant it was probably Jackson or Barr.
"Wakefield?"
she answered warily. "It's me, dead man working." Barr sighed in her ear. "You're recalled to the Yard. The case is broken. We're making an arrest."
"What do you mean?"
"The 9mm gun that killed Ginny Rowland came back covered with prints. Charlie Fringate's prints. Remember his prior conviction? Easy match for SO4. Jackson's thrilled. The whole intruder burglar angle has been dropped, and it's Fringate all the way. He was reputedly carrying on with Madge Comfrey, so as the theory goes, he killed her husband to get him out of the way, and when Ginny Rowland threatened him with blackmail, and he was facing another bankruptcy and couldn't afford to pay, he killed her too." Kate sighed.
"I have to give Jackson credit. That makes more sense than most of the conclusions he leaps to. But it's still wrong. How does he explain that Fringate supposedly had the wit to wipe down the fire iron after beating Comfrey to a pulp, yet when he shot Ginny Rowland in the back, he somehow forgot to wipe his prints off the gun?"
Barr was silent for a moment. "Kate, geez, I didn't even ask myself that."
"That's because you're asleep on your feet. Listen, the last time Jackson went down the wrong road, I faced him directly and lost, and an innocent person went to trial. I won't risk that happening again. Tell Jackson you couldn't get me to answer my phone."
"He'll find that hard to believe. Forensics should be calling you soon, too. Remember when the chief told Nestrick to check all the dustbins in the neighbourhood, not just the Comfreys? It's taken Nestrick this long to examine them, but in one of the bins he struck pay dirt, a heap of billion-thread count bath towels soaked with blood. No doubt the majority is Malcolm Comfrey's. With any luck, traces of the killer's DNA will be on them, too. If Fringate's innocent, he'll get off. Still want to risk Jackson's wrath?
I just need an hour or two, just long enough to re-interview the person who actually killed Malcolm Comfrey and Ginny Rowland.
Who? Barr demanded.
Madge Comfrey, Kate said. I know she did it, and I think I know why.
Chapter 25. Kate almost made the mistake of heading toward the hotel where she had interviewed the Comfreys twice before, an error that could have burned up an hour in London traffic. Then she recalled Superintendent Jackson's typical method of dealing with the affluent: grand gestures and obsequiousness. If Hetheridge had been perceived as offensive to Madge Comfrey, Jackson would seek to advance his own cause by giving Madge proof of his goodwill. He would declare the CID investigation of the Comfrey house finished and allow the Comfreys to return home. A quick call to the yard confirmed it, and Kate turned her vehicle toward Belgravia. In the Comfreys' pea-gravelled car park, Kate switched off her smartphone's ringer, putting the device in journal mode. To assure a smooth prosecution, she needed to document everything Madge Comfrey said. To her surprise, Kate didn't feel especially nervous as she approached the front entrance's tall columns and red-lacquered double doors. Her hands were steady, her heartbeat only slightly elevated. She had been trained for this. She had served her apprenticeship as the second or third officer on a dozen other arrests. She was prepared to take the lead. Chimes sounded within the house when Kate pressed the doorbell. What felt like a full minute passed. Just as Kate was ready to mash the button again, she heard the tap of heels against marble, and Madge Comfrey opened the door. Madge's brown hair was still arranged in that stiff halo of perfect waves. She wore a loose frock, probably Laura Ashley, with a dense floral print. Her pre-programmed expression of welcome shifted to contempt when she recognized Kate.
"Good afternoon, Detective. I assume you've come to issue another apology on your superior's behalf. Write a letter if you feel you must."
Madge moved to close the door in Kate's face.
"Nope,"
Kate said, interposing herself between door and jamb with her left shoulder.
"You have my sincere regrets for any mistreatment you may have suffered, Mrs. Comfrey. But the case isn't closed yet. There are loose ends to be wrapped up, and we need your help."
Madge's fingers tightened on the brass door handle, as if she contemplated shoving Kate backward and slamming the door.
"What sort of loose ends?" "May I come in?"
Kate's tone was polite.
"I'd prefer not." "Very well."
Kate removed her smartphone stylus.
"I'm not sure what your neighbours will make of me interviewing you on your doorstep, but let's hope they keep their speculations to themselves rather than call the media."
Madge's silver-frosted eyelids narrowed. Opening the door wide, she indicated the foyer. "Do come in." The stink of lemon furniture polish hung in the air. As Kate followed Madge into the parlour where she and Hetheridge had conducted that first interview, the odour intensified. Although Madge had been home fewer than 24 hours, a frenzy of cleaning and depersonalization was underway. The oil painting over the mantel had been removed. The frame photographs were gone. All the small touches Kate remembered from the night of the first murder, like that bowl of yellow chrysanthemums, had disappeared. The room was being transformed into the blank canvas only a prospective buyer could love.
"I heard you were putting the house up for sale," Kate said. "Arranging for a major estate auction, too."
"Where did you—" Madge cut off her own question.
"Of course, Lady Margaret knows. When that nosy Parker calls offering sympathy, she's only trawling for gossip, and I thought I was being clever in listing her suggestions for the proper estate agent to wring the most out of the sale, since she associates with those wretched creatures." "The only form of life lower than a copper is an estate agent,"
Kate agreed, smiling at Madge and wondering if she might actually forge a connection with her.
"It couldn't have been easy to learn your husband died whilst in bankruptcy proceedings, and you and Jules stood to inherit very little. Just this house and its contents, once the agent tallies up the value."
"I don't know what you're talking about." Straightening her back, Madge put on the upper-middle-class hauteur Kate despised to the depths of her working-class soul.
"Perhaps people of your background habitually indulge in such vulgar discussions. People of mine do not. If you have a legitimate question pertaining to my late husband's death, please ask it."
Goaded, Kate shot back without thinking.
"Did you beat him to death because he loved Ivy Helgin? Or because he transferred all his assets to her, meaning you and Jules would be forced to earn your living like the rest of the planet?"
Madge's fuchsia lips twisted into a sneer. Was that vindictive expression the last thing Malcolm Comfrey and Ginny Rowland had ever seen? As if she'd plucked the latter name from Kate's mind, Madge said,
"Moments like these, I rather wish Ginny was still alive. We used to have a bit of fun, psychoanalyzing the motives of creatures like Ivy, and you come to that. How you quite likely embarked on a career in law enforcement for the opportunity to harass your betters without fear of retribution. I'm glad you're the one who came to question me. Now I can continue the analysis, even if Ginny's no longer able to compare notes."
Turning to the liquor trolley beside the long white sofa, Madge poured herself a glass of brandy. Unself-conscious, she swallowed half of it at a gulp, as if Kate were a tradesperson or some other nonentity. Then her head swivelled back to Kate, her smile a parody of the gracious hostess.
"Do you take your gin straight or submerged in fizzy soda?"
Kate let it go. She was determined not to lose her self-control again.
"You discovered your husband was illegally liquidating his own business, didn't you, Mrs. Comfrey?"
"He boasted of it." Madge sneered again.
"You wouldn't believe a man impotent for 10 years could think with his dick. But such is the miracle of Viagra. Oh, yes, he was rapturously in love with Ivy, taking our life savings, the millions he could never have earned without me by his side, and concealing it in her ludicrous vitamin company. Quite a nest egg for their future wedded life. I must say, Ginny and I had a laugh at the notion of Ivy setting up house for Mal, fitted carpet in every room, 3-piece suites of furniture, and a print of Monet's water lilies in a living room, no doubt. You've been personal with me, Detective, so I'll be personal with you. Does it follow, to your sort's way of thinking, that once you've married up you'll be welcomed as a member of the new class? That your husband's old friends will teach you how to dress, speak, entertain, and so on, without continually giving offence? You tell me, didn't you try to move up the ladder by marrying Tony Hetheridge? Didn't Ginny Rowland go from prostitute to financier's wife? Ah, but Ginny was brilliant at transformation. Too damned smart for her own good, if you ask me,"
Madge added with a chuckle. Recognizing the germ of a confession within that sound, Kate's skin prickled into goose-flesh. There was something hypnotically cobra-like in Madge's manner, in how she alluded to murder in those plummy tones, as if Kate were the one who ought to be ashamed of herself. Was that why Kate still hovered beside the cold hearth, too intimidated to sit down without invitation, neglecting even to take notes? Without Hetheridge's presence to span the class abyss, was she incapable of seizing control? A faint noise, like a door closing at the back of the house, startled Kate. Madge, refilling her glass, didn't seem to notice. Perhaps the Comfrey's cleaner was still rattling around the place, boxing up whatnots before the estate agent arrived.
"I like how you call your superior Tony."
Madge saw Kate open her mouth to speak, but cut across her without a flicker of apology.
"Ginny told me she teased him about you and that other detective, the Blackie, and Tony came over all baronial. Huffed he was Lord Hetheridge, thank you very much, and not to be mocked. It amuses Tony to play the egalitarian, but make no mistake, he's nearly as complete a rotter as Malcolm ever was. The only difference between the aristocracy and Mal's sort is the aristocrats prize blood above all. They never turn on their own." "So that's why you killed Mr. Comfrey?"
This time Kate interrupted Madge, East London accent escaping.
"Because he turned on you and Jules, except of course he couldn't really count Jules's blood, could he? Not when she's C.S. Hetheridge's daughter."
"I have Ginny to thank for Mal hearing of that." Madge looked almost sad. Smart as she was, Ginny was greedy too. She resorted to blackmail, first with Mal, then with me. That's why our friendship ended on a cool note. Such masterful understatement would usually force at least a grudging smile from Kate, but she was stung too deeply by Madge's barbs to do anything but accuse in a monotone.
"So you shot her in the back?" "Couldn't manage it any other way,"
Madge admitted with brittle good humour.
"Quite different with Mal, I assure you. With him it wasn't about extortion or keeping out of prison. It was about beating that bloody triumphant look off his face. He never got out of his chair, you know,"
Madge went on, describing her victim's behaviour as another Belgravia housewife might recount a shop girl's abominable cheek.
just put aside his book and told me his plans. He was so proud of scheming up a way to cast me off, marry Ivy, and leave Jules and me with nothing but crumbs. I demanded to know why. He said I was old."
Madge's lips compressed into a dangerous slash.
"As if he wasn't, and he said things about Jules so heartless they made my skin crawl. He went on and on, doing what he loved best to someone he no longer loved at all."
A second door opened somewhere. The sound of a voice, a scrape and a thump. What if the cleaner popped in to say her goodbyes, prompting Madge to recall herself and demand a solicitor? Moments ago, Kate would have cursed an interruption. Now something in Madge's war-paint, in the mad light of her pale blue eyes, made Kate almost wish someone would wander in.
"Maybe you just meant to threaten your husband and things got out of hand,"
Kate offered, eyes on the parlour door.
"Maybe you didn't mean to kill him."
"I meant to walk away." Madge downed another gulp of brandy.
"That's what he couldn't endure. He called me back like a headmaster summoning a schoolboy. When he finished dressing me down, I was ill, violently ill, heaving up my guts while he laughed. 'Mum!'
It was Jules. Madge didn't answer, didn't even seem to hear, still holding Kate's gaze with increasing intensity.
"When I composed myself, Malcolm said he'd pack his bags in the morning. In the meantime, he'd finish his drink. 'The fire's dying,' he said. He pointed to the fireplace and said, 'Stir it up before you go.' Mum!"
Jules called again, louder. "Oi, Madge!" Kevin shouted. Raucous laughter followed.
"I never felt out of control,"
Madge continued defiantly, as if Kate counted on such an excuse.
"Just done with him. Done with Malcolm Comfrey taking up space on this earth, so I stirred up the fire and hit him with the poker until my arm ached, until his blood stuck to my face and hair. Then I drove the poker into his skull. He was still alive, gurgled a bit with the poker hanging out of his eye socket. I watched him die, and felt nothing, everything, but not sorry. Mum!"
The door banged open as Jules bounded into the parlour.
"Kevin and I are starving. Want us to bring you back a takeaway curry?"
Jules wore her Kevin's toy T-shirt and ripped blue jeans. Her resemblance to Hetheridge was obvious, now that Kate expected it, despite the girl's dilated pupils and loopy grin. Kevin Whitley, appearing at Jules' shoulder, also looked in the grip of some marvellous diversion. Jules recognized Kate. The girl's features, briefly happy, reassumed their natural sullen look.
"What's she doing here, Mum? Aren't we suing Scotland Yard?" "Was it Jules who helped conceal your guilt?"
Kate prodded Madge.
"Or was it Kevin?"
That contemptuous curl of the lips again, that mad light in the eyes.
"They're innocent, Detective. Haven't you been listening?"
"What's she on about?" Kevin demanded of Kate.
"Mrs. Comfrey told me she killed her husband. I want to know how she concealed the evidence."
Jules made a high-pitched noise of denial. Kevin, more practical despite his drug du jour, was outraged. "She can't do this to you, Madge. Call a solicitor. Don't say nothing else." Madge shook her head. Swallowing the remains of her drink, she set the glass back on the liquor trolley with a thump of finality.
"I don't need a solicitor."
Madge reached into the front pocket of her dress, withdrawing a black, snub-nosed pistol.
"I have everything under control."
"Hang on," Kevin cried. "That's mine." Kate's throat constricted as her stomach gave a steep, sickening lurch. As Madge braced her right hand with her left, keeping the gun level, Kate heard something small and metallic clatter to the floor. Her smartphone had fallen, because her fingers had forgotten to clasp it.
"Watch it, Detective. I was shaky with Ginny, won't be shaky with you." "Mum!"
Jules cried.
Mrs. Comfrey,"
Kate said, horrified at how her voice shook and determined to speak regardless.
"Put down the gun. You won't commit a third murder right in front of your daughter."
Madge spared trembling, white-faced Jules a glance.
"You are nothing to her," she said, locking gazes with Kate again. "And she needn't look. It'll all be done in the blink of an eye." "Mum, I don't care if you killed Dad."
Jules darted close to Madge, almost close enough to shield Kate from the gun barrel.
"I'm glad you did. He deserved it, but you didn't kill Ginny. You couldn't have." "I never killed your father, darling. I should have told you long ago. You were Malcolm's in name only."
The gun wavered as Madge took on a wheedling tone.
As for Ginny, I would have fixed things differently, I promise. I only took along Charlie's shooter for self-defense, but she'd guessed about Malcolm and said if I didn't pay up, she'd sell the story to the tabloids. I had no choice. In name only, Jules repeated, eyes brimming with tears. Hope surged in Kate. If Jules rushed to her mother, blocking Madge's aim, it could provide Kate's only chance to escape. But even as Kate prepared to run, Kevin pushed Jules aside, lunging for the pistol. "Give me that!" The gun went off. Kate's ears rang and she tasted bile. But she managed to keep her feet, even as Jules dropped to her knees with a wail and Kevin blundered into the liquor trolley, sending it crashing to the floor. Only Madge remained calm, bracing her right hand as she again trained the weapon on Kate. "That's mine!" Kevin howled again, kicking himself free of the liquor trolley with another loud crash. "You stole it, you mad bat!" Kate tore her gaze from the gun long enough to glance at Jules. The girl was back on her feet, fists pressed against her mouth to hold in the sobs, but physically unharmed. No bullet hole marred any of the walls Kate could see, which meant it was probably lodged in the plaster behind her head. Jules' half-muffled sobs escalated in pitch. "Oh, for God's sake, darling, go!" Madge snapped. "No one will ever be able to prove you witnessed this. I'll be in touch once I reach the continent. I mean it, Kev," she said louder, when he seemed poised to lunge for his weapon again. "Take Jules and go." "If you want to help Mrs. Comfrey, one of you should stay here," Kate said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "The other should call 999. "Oh, come off it."
Madge took a step toward Kate, lifting the pistol and cocking the hammer. Jules, face blotchy and eyes red, took a last look at Kate over her shoulder. Then Kevin pulled her through the doorway, and they were gone.
"Killing me won't change things for you."
The words tumbled out as Kate realized neither Jules nor Kevin would call anyone on her behalf.
"And murdering a police officer will destroy any hope of a light sentence." "I won't get a light sentence, I'll get life. Besides, you underestimate me."
Madge smiled.
"When it comes to killing, I seem to be a gifted amateur. All my life I've been a good girl. Even when his lordship pushed me aside, did I force him to pay me off or marry me? No. I found another man to provide the only thing I ever wanted, security. If Malcolm hadn't tried to deny me what was mine, I would have let him go. As it was, I quite enjoyed taking his life. Perhaps I'll enjoy taking yours, too."
"Not as much as you'd enjoy taking mine, Madge. Let Sergeant Wakefield go. It's me you have a grudge against." Kate didn't dare turn, but she would have known that voice anywhere. "Let the sergeant go, let me take her place," Hetheridge said. "Madge, I'm making you a serious offer."
"Why would I do that?"
"She has no history with you. She's done nothing to harm you. You and I are the ones with unfinished business." For the first time, Madge looked uncertain.
"Why bargain? I have 5 bullets. I could shoot you both."
"One of us would make it across the room before the second shot," Hetheridge said. "You'll lose control if you get greedy, Madge."
"Are you lecturing me again?"
Madge's voice trembled with anger.
"That's why I mix painkillers with my Valium, because men have treated me like rubbish all my life. That's why I kept Jules from you, Tony, because I never wanted her father to reject her as heartlessly as he rejected me once the novelty of her existence wore off."
"Madge," Kate heard Hetheridge take a measured step forward. "I'm sorry for what I did to you. Truly sorry. Let Sergeant Wakefield go."
"Come closer,"
Madge said. Hetheridge took one step past Kate, then another. He did not look at her. He came to a halt less than a meter from the gun, which Madge pointed at his face.
"You can go,"
Madge said to Kate, her eyes on Hetheridge. Kate couldn't move. She didn't want to. All she could do, even in the grip of terror, was try and calculate some superhuman way she could reach the gun and wrestle it away before Madge could pull the trigger. "Go," Hetheridge said. Kate couldn't make herself move. "Go now!" Hetheridge roared. Kate's body responded quicker than her brain. First she was stumbling, then running, escaping the house the way she'd come. Bursting out of the double doors, she hit the front steps, falling into the arms of Paul Barr. Superintendent Jackson's second unit had set up camp on the Comfrey's front lawn. A van-based command centre was parked on the street, while several panda cars, blue lights flashing, were positioned to impede traffic.
"Couldn't let you do this alone," Paul said, holding Kate tight.
I called Tony, and he called out the troops. Then he insisted on going in through that broken side door. Are you all right?" Kate tried to answer, but no sound came from her. Just the thunderous boom of a gunshot inside the house. Pulling away from Paul, Kate surged toward the red-lacquered doors, powered by terror and no thought except to get to Hetheridge. Hands caught her, seizing her shoulders and waist. She kicked and flailed, screaming for release, but they didn't let go. A deadly shift occurred around Kate. It was the slide and pop of well-oiled, rarely used weaponry as officers took position to fire on the person whose footsteps approached. "It's Hetheridge," the chief superintendent shouted. "Stand down." Despite his self-identification, Hetheridge came into view with hands up. Blood and bits of shiny white tissue covered half his face, and for one endless moment Kate thought he'd been shot in the head. Then she realized his eyes were clear and his gait steady. The fatal wound had been Madge's. "Tony!" The restraining hands released her. As Hetheridge tried to wipe his face on his overcoat, Kate threw herself against him, heedless of the gruesome remnants. Emergency technicians rushed into the house, pushing Kate and Hetheridge aside as she scanned him, top to bottom, convinced he bore some hidden wound. "Are you okay?" He nodded, taking deep gulps of air. "Are you mad? Why did you do that?" Hetheridge didn't speak. "Why?" Kate screamed. Hetheridge gripped her hands to silence her, or perhaps to answer her. Staring in his eyes, Kate wasn't sure what passed between them. Hetheridge's gaze dropped. Blood. Kate looked at his legs, then her own. A dark triangle had begun to spread along her left trouser leg. As she watched it grow, mesmerized, her lower back and left side were gripped by vicious, rapidly increasing contractions. "Oh, no!" "You!" Hetheridge caught a rescue worker by the arm, yanking him toward Kate. "See to her! Now!" Chapter 26. Hetheridge knew it was a cliché to detest hospitals, but he didn't so much detest the places as avoid them altogether. During his father's final hospitalization, he'd been legitimately and blessedly detained on a case that demanded his presence until the day of the funeral. But if Hetheridge had managed a bedside visit, heaven only knew what he and his father would have said to one another. As for his mother, she'd exhibited the good breeding to drop dead at home. Not for her the scuffed linoleum, stark white walls and fluorescent lights that never stopped burning. But if she had been confined to one of these numbered rooms, surrounded by bustling medical personnel, by beeps and whispers and bursts of nervous laughter, what would he have said to her? Hetheridge didn't know. He imagined himself offering a bunch of cellophane-wrapped flowers, struggling to look anything but miserably uncomfortable as he— what? Came forth with the tide of heretofore unexpressed emotion. Glancing at the cellophane-wrapped bouquet in his hand, yellow and pink flowers pronounced cheery by the shopkeeper, Hetheridge made his way through the aseptic-smelling ward to room 6115. Outside the door on a whiteboard someone had block-printed in blue marker, K. Wakefield. What would he say to Kate? He drew in his breath. This was duty. He could manage duty. At least he had for 60 years, give or take the odd spot of cowardice. The door was open, and to his relief and frustration, Kate wasn't alone. He'd imagined her in drug-induced slumber, face half obscured by an oxygen mask, needles and tubes poking out of bruised flesh. Instead, he found her propped up against a mound of pillows, wooden board across her lap, playing cards with two young men. One, a bespectacled blob he guessed was the nephew, Henry. The other, a tall man with unruly curls, Hetheridge momentarily mistook for an old suitor, a la the late Dillon, who'd seen the news and rushed to Kate's side. A surge of resentment struck him, along with an impulse to drop the bouquet and flee. But then the curly-haired man turned his unflinching over-direct stare on Hetheridge, and he realized he looked upon Kate's brother, Richie. "Hi, Chief," Kate said. Her hair was in need of a wash, and her face was uncharacteristically devoid of makeup, but her smile made him clutch the flowers tighter. "Hello," he said. Why did she call him Chief when this was a social call? Why did he care?
Guys, this is my gov, Chief Superintendent Hetheridge. Chief, this is Henry Wakefield. She indicated the blob. And this is my brother Richie.
Hetheridge put out his hand to each in turn. Tony, he muttered. How do you do?
I'm okay,
Richie said.
How do you do?
Henry said evenly. He surprised Hetheridge with his firm handshake and correct response, which was disappearing so quickly Hetheridge thought he might live to see its extinction.
Should we call you Lord Hetheridge?
Henry's eyes sparkled behind large round spectacles. He seemed to hope for an excuse to use the title as much as possible.
Like Lord Vader,
Richie said.
Dark Lord of the Sith.
Henry dropped the mature manner, dissolving into childish laughter that Richie promptly joined. Kate rolled her eyes.
Henry, weren't you going to show Rich the canteen? He's still hungry.
I fancy a sweet, Richie told Hetheridge.
I've shown him already,
Henry protested, throwing down his cards.
Show him again,
Kate said.
I know you have a few quid left. Share with Richie and I'll make it up to you later.
Henry digested this command with ill grace. Indicating Hetheridge with his eyes, he stage-whispered,
Ask about the fencing.
Then he flounced into the hall, forcing Richie to leap up, nearly knocking over Hetheridge in his effort to catch up.
No, you can't hold my hand.
Henry's indignant voice carried back to the room.
I'm not your boyfriend.
They seem in good spirits, Hetheridge said, as he would have remarked about a host's crotch-sniffing dogs.
Oh, they're charming, all right. And if you're wondering, they have no idea I'm the officer Madge held at gunpoint or what you did. And no clue about the miscarriage either. They think I'm in for a stomach bug.
Kate adopted a bright, not-too-serious tone.
Speaking of what you did, I still haven't thanked you properly.
I wish you wouldn't. Kate gathered up the cards, placing the pack and the lap desk atop the bedside table.
You can sit down if you want,
she said mildly. Hetheridge perched on one of the institution-style chairs. The room was too hot. Sweat had begun to roll down his back, a sensation he detested.
Are those for me?
Hetheridge looked at Kate blankly.
The flowers.
Oh, yes, indeed, yes. Here you are. He heard himself dithering along with the reflexive throat-clearing he'd so often mocked in his father and grandfather. Kate gave the bouquet a sniff.
I don't think anyone's given me flowers before. Cheers, Gov.
She placed the bouquet atop the bedside table.
And speaking of the miscarriage, you must be relieved I didn't whisk you down to the registry office the day after you proposed, eh?
Hetheridge floundered mentally for the right reply. Just as he sensed it within his grasp, Kate said,
No, forget that. It wasn't fair of me to say. You'll have to excuse me. I've come out with some odd remarks since yesterday. I feel like a rubber band stretched too far, like I might pop.
You will. Lest he sound too serious, or, heaven forbid, begin confiding the worst moments of his own sleepless night, Hetheridge added, Just be sure to vent the explosion on an object self-absorbed enough to withstand it, like dear Spa.
He was here this morning, played Mad Libs with the boys. He mentioned you insisted on prosecuting Kevin Whitley for providing an illegal weapon to Madge. Is this the first hint of fatherly impulses toward Jules?
Kate sounded irritated rather than teasing. I don't know. My life used to make sense. Now, with the arrival of Jules and, well, other concerns, I'm making decisions moment by moment, Hetheridge said honestly. Usually I don't personally involve myself in issues relatively tangential to the case, but in this instance, yes. I think the kindest thing I can do for Jules is eliminate the most negative influence in her life.
That cow will just find someone worse. Not that it matters. Aristocrats never turn on their own. Madge told me that, and I think she was right. Do you suppose that's why she shot herself instead of you? So you'd be around to mind Jules?
Perhaps, Hetheridge sighed. They were back on dangerous ground, heading into topics he would happily pay thousands to sidestep. You think I shouldn't try to impose myself in Jules' life, then?
I think she cold-bloodedly left me to die.
Kate blinked a few times, looking away.
If you still want to know her, that's your business.
The silence stretched for so long, Hetheridge seriously considered commenting on the weather. Then inspiration struck. Charlie Fringate's been cleared of all charges, you know. We're confident Madge lifted his handgun without his knowledge. We'll probably prosecute him at a future date for illegal possession, but not now. He's under suicide watch at this very hospital. Became hysterical when he learned Madge shot herself. Sobbed like a child. His tone held the requisite contempt, even as he added mentally, "The lucky bastard."
"Lucky bastard," Kate said.
Hetheridge blinked at her, then he smiled. "It would be easier, wouldn't it?"
"God, yes."
The sounds of Henry and Richie Wakefield preceded their arrival by a good 30 seconds. It was the sort of "you are, no, you are" banter heard daily in every schoolyard and pub in Britain. Richie was eating a cornetto. Henry had a family-sized bag of cookies. Hetheridge, who deviated from his peers in his dislike of crotch-sniffing, shoe-devouring canines, felt much the same about children and childlike adults. Time to escape. "When are you due for release, then?" he asked, almost jumping to his feet. Kate looked amused.
"Tomorrow, and I should be back at the yard in a week or two."
That long, Hetheridge thought. But what did he know about miscarriage? And surely not everyone chose to recover from the threat of violent death by immersing themselves in a fresh murder investigation as soon as possible. "I'll try not to strangle Bar while you're gone." Hetheridge moved toward the door as Henry and Richie settled back into their chairs. Richie was absorbed in his ice cream, and Henry was shoveling down cookies. Kate, replacing the long wooden desk across her lap, began shuffling cards. Hetheridge realized he was obligated to go. He had essentially excused himself, yet he hadn't accomplished his primary goal, settling on a day to see Kate again. 1 or 2 weeks was too long to wait.
"So the fencing's all fixed?"
Henry said between mouthfuls.
"Oh!"
Kate slapped her hand against her forehead.
"Tony, I'm sorry to ask, but would you be willing to give Henry fencing lessons? He's keen on the notion, especially if you can scare up a lightsaber or two."
Henry made a contemptuous noise.
"Nobody's come up with real lightsaber technology yet, Kate."
"My mistake." Kate shot her cheeky grin at Hetheridge, making him realize he would have said yes to anything, including dog-sitting. "I'll be glad to. When can you bring Henry by?" he asked, proud of how neutral he sounded.
"Friday, round 7?
"Friday at 7 it is." Hetheridge strode even faster than usual toward the lifts. He hadn't much time. He needed to arrange for the rental of a portly child's costume and mask. The third-floor loo was dodgy too. He had to get Harvey on it post-haste, or his Friday guests would surely try to flush too much paper and make it overflow. As the lift opened, Hetheridge curtailed a boyish impulse to whistle. He knew the spectre of the gun would reappear when he tried to sleep that night, as would Madge's expression as she pulled the trigger. But one advantage of turning 60 was the realization that still being alive was the point. Perhaps the Charlie Fringates of the nation, mocked as they were, had the market cornered on emotional expression. That was fine, at least until it ended in a suicide watch. Hetheridge and Kate weren't that sort. They carried on. He caught himself whistling a scrap of tune as the lift began to descend. The lift's only other passenger, an old trout in a powder-blue suit, shot him a look of disapproval. Hetheridge ignored her. Friday, he thought. The Bentley's driver, seeing him emerge from the hospital, eased the vehicle toward the curb. Putting on his sunglasses, a convenience Hetheridge now couldn't imagine living without, he strode into the daylight. This has been Ice Blue, Lord and Lady Hetheridge. Written by Emma Jameson, narrated by Matthew Lloyd Davis. Copyright 2011 by Stephanie Abbott. Production copyright 2016 by Stephanie Abbott.